I'm Dirk Strongman, reading from William Walker Atkinson's The Inner Consciousness. Chapter 1 was The Inner Consciousness. Chapter 3 will be The Basements of the Mind. This is Chapter 2, The Planes of Consciousness. We have seen in the preceding chapter that many leading minds have recognized the existence and the phenomena of certain planes of consciousness lying outside of, that meaning below or above, the ordinary plane or field of ordinary consciousness. Brushing aside as unimportant the various names and terms that have been applied to these planes or fields of inner consciousness, we easily find a common ground of agreement between all of the authorities. It is true that the subject has become somewhat clouded by the insistence of certain details of theory on the part of the several investigators, but they all practically agree upon the fundamental and basic facts and phenomena. And it is upon these basic and fundamental facts and phenomena that we shall rest our case, as presented in this little book. The student of psychology has heard much during the past decade regarding the many theories, some of them quite fantastic, designed to account for and explain the phenomena which science finds to exist and which it has classified as belonging to the inner conscious plane of mental activity. Some of the authorities advanced to account for the known facts and observed phenomena have attracted to their support many followers, the respective schools holding animated and sometimes fierce contests regarding the validity and superior qualities of their respective schools and their founders. But with these theories and the schools which have been built up upon them, this work will have little to do or say. Enough for us is the fact of the existence of the phenomena, and the fact that there is certainly in manifestation an area of mental activity which, for reasons that we shall state, we have called the inner consciousness. Recognizing the fact of the phenomena and accepting it as proven truth, we shall proceed to consider its manifestations and its apparent laws, and also the methods whereby one may use this mental activity to advantage. But we shall leave the theories to the theorists, and the discussions regarding the same to those who are fond of such exercises of the mind. For ourselves, we are tired of such things, and we prefer to deal with observed facts and the how to get results part of the question. We are apt to regard as a truth the observation of the writer who said, "Theories are but mighty soap bubbles with which the grown-up children of science amuse themselves." And we also view with favor the lines of the poet, in which he says, "The nearer to the practical men keep, the less they deal in vague and abstract things. The less they deal in huge, mysterious words, the mightier is their power. The simple peasant who observes a truth, and from the fact deduces principle, adds a solid treasure to the public wealth. The theorist who dreams a rainbow dream and calls hypothesis philosophy, at best is but a paper financier who palms his specious promises for gold. Facts are the basis of philosophy. Philosophy, the harmony of facts, seen in their right relation. Now, as a matter of fact, in order to account for the phenomena of the inner consciousness, it's not necessary to believe in or to assume the hypothesis of any kind of a dual mind at all. One mind may contain within itself sufficient to account for the facts, without postulating a two-mind theory. One mind may contain within itself two or many more than two planes or fields of activity or consciousness, upon which and in which the varied mental phenomena may be manifested. In order to understand the phenomena of the inner consciousness, all that is necessary for us to do is to start with the idea that in the mind of every person there are areas, fields, or planes of mental activity above and below the field, area, or plane that we know as the outer consciousness. In other words, to assume, one, that there are basements or cellars, vaults and subvaults of mind below the level of the mental first floor in which we consider the results of our mental processes. And number two, is this true that also there are several mental stories above as well as below, the one on which we do our considering. And it is with these several stories of mind, these planes or areas of mental activity, that we shall now have to do in this work. As we have seen from the authorities quoted, the field or areas of mind outside of the circle of the outer consciousness are many and varied. Careful investigators have divided the mental activities of these several planes or areas into two general classes, namely, one, those below the plane of outer consciousness, and which have the nature of automatic action. And number two, those, so to speak, above the plane of outer consciousness, and which have the nature of intuitive action, etc. Some investigators have given these two general planes or fields of mentation the names of the subconscious and the superconscious, respectively. The term sub, meaning under, beneath, etc., and the term super, meaning above, over, etc. The trouble with this classification is that it places the conscious mind, or that portion of our mentality, the actions of which we may call the outer, in the center of a scale. The extremes of which represent the higher and lower phases of inner mentation, respectively. This is not correct. For the so-called conscious mind is merely a field of observation, before which passes the results of mental activity on the other planes, which when evolved passed into the field of consciousness. Just as a star passes into the field of observation of a telescope, or a tiny object into the field of observation of a microscope, and is then perceived by the watching organ of vision. These objects passing into the field of observation of the outer consciousness may come from the higher or lower planes of the inner mind. In fact, the best observers know there can be no hard and fast line drawn between the activities and the manifestations of the two respective groups of planes known as the subconscious and superconscious minds. These activities shade into each other and are like the degrees on a scale, which are merely symbols which record the comparative and relative stages of manifestation of a thing, though which do not divide the thing into absolute divisions or classes. In fact, the very best occult authorities inform us that there are very many degrees or planes of mental activity, higher and lower, outside of the field of observation of the outer consciousness. On the lower planes of consciousness are to be found the consciousness of the various cells and cell groups in our bodies, which constitute the organ minds which occultists know to exist. Then there are many planes of mentation concerned with directing the bodily activities. Then there are many planes of thought below the ordinary field of outer consciousness, and many planes of awareness and knowing above that of the ordinary intellectual operations of the average mind. These planes are merely the many degrees in the grand scale of mind. We shall learn something of certain of them as, we proceed with these lessons. Following the illustration of the upper and lower stories, basements, cellars, subcellars, etc., we may say that it will help the student to think of the ordinary field of observation, known as the outer consciousness of the everyday mind, as akin to the main floor of a warehouse, one which has received merchandise arriving from the outside business world, and on which are started, packed, and expressed the various goods, wares, and merchandise reaching that department from the upper stories, the basement, the cellars, and other storehouses of the mental warehouse and place of business in pursuance to orders from the office. The outer consciousness, or field of observation and consideration, is not a separate mind, as some may claim, or the real mind, as the masses of people consider it, but instead is merely a department of the whole mental business, in which the goods, the stored articles, the manufactured goods from the other departments and workshops are sorted, selected, packed, and expressed to the outer world. If you will fix this illustration in your mind, you will be able to easily assimilate and consider the facts to which we shall call your attention in the following lessons. And now, you see why we have adopted the term the inner consciousness as applicable to both the higher and the lower planes of the extra-conscious mental activities. The term inner means further in, interior, internal, not outer, etc. The word consciousness is one difficult to correctly define. In a general sense, it means mental awareness. But we have adhered to the closer meaning of the term, which is used in the sense of awareness of mental action and energy, or the quality by which mind in activity is aware of its own activities. There can be no mental activity without consciousness on some plane. And the use of the word unconscious in connection with mental activity is an absurdity. There is consciousness in some degree and on some plane in everything. From the atom and the electron to the highest manifestation of superhuman mind, and that which we call our outer consciousness is merely one of the many planes of the manifestation of the quality. And now, let us proceed to our consideration of the phenomena and the principles of manifestation of the inner consciousness. As stated, the next lesson, lesson 3, will be the basements of the mind.